September 1918. World War I has been raging for 4 brutal years. Over 15 million people are dead. The Western Front is a stalemate nobody can break. Generals are out of ideas. Soldiers are out of hope. The world is exhausted and bleeding. But deep in the mountains of the Balkans, on a rocky ridge most people have never heard of, something is about to happen. A battle so small, so forgotten, so far from the cameras and the history books that almost nobody alive today knows it took place. And yet, within 6 weeks of this battle ending, World War I will be over. This is the Battle of Dobro Polje. And this is the story of how a forgotten ridge in the Balkans ended the deadliest war the world had ever seen. While the world was watching France and Belgium, there was another front in World War I that history quietly buried. It was called the Salonika Front, and it stretched across the brutal mountain terrain of what is today North Macedonia, Greece, Albania, and Serbia. This was a forgotten front. The soldiers sent here were forgotten almost immediately. Back home, newspapers barely mentioned them. Generals on the Western Front called it a sideshow. Supplies were scarce. Roads barely existed. The mountains were steep, rocky, and unforgiving. Winters were savage. Disease spread faster than bullets. Malaria alone put more men in hospital beds than enemy fire ever did. The men fighting here had a nickname for themselves. They called themselves the Gardeners of Salonika because they felt like they had been planted in the ground and left to rot while the real war happened somewhere else. By the summer of 1918, something was quietly changing on this forgotten front. The Allied Army of the Orient, a massive multinational force of French, Serbian, British, Greek, and Italian soldiers, had been preparing a major assault for months. Their target was a heavily fortified Bulgarian and German defensive line running along a high mountain ridge called Dobro Polje, and it sat nearly 1,800 meters above sea level. To take it, they would have to attack uphill, against deeply dug in enemy positions, across some of the most punishing terrain of the entire war. The plan was bold. Some said it was reckless, but the Allies had a secret weapon, and that secret weapon was Serbian fury. To understand why the Serbian soldiers on this front fought the way they did, you have to understand what they had already survived. This was not just an army. This was a nation that had been destroyed and forced to rebuild itself from nothing, in exile on a foreign island, dreaming of one thing: going home. In the winter of 1915, the Serbian army had been hit from 3 sides at once. Austria-Hungary attacked from the north and west. Germany pushed from the north. Bulgaria, freshly entered into the war on the side of the Central Powers, struck from the east. The Serbian army was completely surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from Allied support. There was no way to fight their way out. There was only one direction left: backwards, into the mountains. What followed was one of the most devastating retreats in military history. The entire Serbian army, along with tens of thousands of civilians, old men, women, and children, was forced to retreat on foot through the Albanian mountains in the dead of winter. There were no roads. There was almost no food, no warm shelter, no medical supplies worth speaking of. The mountain passes were buried in snow. The wind cut through everything. Men died standing up from exhaustion. Soldiers who sat down to rest never got back up. Children froze to death in their mother's arms. Officers with years of combat experience collapsed from starvation and could not be moved. The column kept walking because stopping meant dying, and even walking sometimes meant dying anyway. By the time the survivors finally reached the Albanian coast and were evacuated by Allied ships to the Greek island of Corfu, the Serbian army had lost nearly half its strength. Not to bullets, to the mountain, to winter, and to hunger. On Corfu, the survivors were nursed back to health, re-equipped and retrained over 2 long years. They were given new rifles, new artillery, new uniforms, and one single assignment: return to the Salonika front and fight your way home. By 1918, these were not ordinary soldiers. Every man who survived the Albanian retreat and made it back to the front carried something inside him that no training exercise can produce: the absolute, unshakable need to finish what had been started. Their commander, Field Marshal Zivojin Misic, one of the most gifted military strategists of the entire war, understood this completely. He spent months planning the assault on Dobro Polje with obsessive, meticulous precision. He massed over 550 artillery pieces along the front. He stockpiled shells and supplies for weeks. He drilled his troops to move at maximum speed the moment a breakthrough happened, to push north without stopping, without waiting, without looking back. These men were not fighting for strategy. They were not fighting for politics. They were fighting to walk back through the front door of their own country. And nothing was going to stop them. At dawn on the 14th of September, 1918, the Salonika front erupted. The Allied artillery opened with one of the most concentrated bombardments the entire Balkan theater had ever seen. Over 550 guns pounded the Bulgarian and German positions on the ridgeline for hours. Bunkers collapsed under direct hits. Communication lines were destroyed. Enemy artillery batteries were silenced one by one. The mountain shook under the weight of the barrage. Rocks and soil rained down the slopes. The sound could be heard for miles in every direction. Then the infantry moved. Serbian and French divisions left their positions and began climbing the steep rocky slopes under heavy fire. The altitude was punishing. Men gasped for breath while carrying full combat loads up near vertical terrain, through smoke, falling debris, and coils of wire. Bulgarian defenders, still alive in their fortified positions, fired down on the advancing troops with everything they had. The fighting was brutal, close, and relentless. But the Bulgarian line was not what it had once been. Years of continuous warfare, disease, chronic undersupply, and collapsing morale had ground their army down close to its breaking point. Entire units had gone months without proper rotation or rest. When the full Allied assault hit, they began to crack from the pressure. Within 48 hours, the Allied forces had punched a massive hole through the enemy defensive line at Dobro Polje. A clean, decisive breakthrough, exactly the kind commanders on the Western Front had spent 4 years trying and failing to achieve. Serbian cavalry and fast-moving infantry poured through the gap immediately and drove north at a pace that shocked Allied high command itself. The Bulgarian army tried to regroup. They tried to seal the breach. It was already too late. The Serbian advance was too fast, too relentless, and too driven by something deeper than military discipline to slow down. Town after town fell. Ridge after ridge was overrun. The Bulgarian lines were not retreating in good order. They were disintegrating. What happened in the 6 weeks after Dobro Polje is one of the most extraordinary chain reactions in the history of modern warfare, and almost nobody knows it happened. With their army in collapse and Allied forces pouring through the gap, Bulgaria signed an armistice on the 29th of September, 1918, just 15 days after the assault began. It was the first Central Powers nation to formally surrender. The moment Bulgaria fell, the German 11th Army, stationed in the Balkans, found itself cut off, surrounded, and without any viable escape route. They had no choice but to surrender as well. The southeastern flank of the Central Powers had been torn open. Allied forces flooded north through Serbia, liberating towns and villages that had been under occupation for 3 years. Serbian soldiers marched back through streets they had left as a broken army. In 1915, the advance did not stop there. Allied columns pushed up into the heart of Austria-Hungary from the south, arriving at the exact moment that empire was already tearing itself apart from within, fractured by nationalism, starvation, strikes, and revolution spreading city by city. On the 3rd of November, 1918, Austria-Hungary signed its armistice. Another empire gone. Germany was now alone. Its allies had collapsed one by one. Its supply lines were severed. The Ottoman Empire had signed its own armistice on the 30th of October, 1918. Revolution was spreading inside Germany itself. The military leadership told the Kaiser it was over. On the 11th of November, 1918, Germany signed the armistice on the Western Front. World War I was over, and it had all begun unraveling on a mountain ridge in the Balkans 6 weeks earlier. Here is what makes this story hit differently. The Battle of Dobro. Polje had roughly 5,000 casualties. By World War I standards, that is a small skirmish. The Somme had more deaths in a single morning. So history moved on. The Western Front took all the headlines, and Dobro Polje was quietly filed away and forgotten. But the historians who have studied this front in depth are ambiguous. Without the breakthrough at Dobro Polje, the war would almost certainly have continued into 1919. More offensives, more counterattacks, potentially hundreds of thousands more dead. The armistice of November 11th, 1918, that the whole world remembers happened because of what a Serbian-led force achieved on a mountain nobody was watching. The gardeners of Salonika. The soldiers the newspapers forgot. The army that marched through snow and starvation and came back anyway. They broke the line. They started the domino. They ended the war. If you want more forgotten stories from the Balkans, about wars, dark history, and legends, subscribe to my channel. I am just starting out, and I would really appreciate the support. Drop a comment below. Had you ever heard of the Battle of Dobro Polje before today?